The cold that winter morning wrapped the town in a brittle silence, the kind that made even the sharpest whispers seem like distant echoes lost beneath the weight of snow. Evelyn Mae stood at the edge of the worn path leading from the old family cabin, her breath rising in pale clouds against the gray dawn. Her coat, threadbare and stiff from frost, clung to her thin frame. But it could not shield the quiet ache in her chest, the ache of being seen and yet not really seen at all. The world regarded her as too plain, a shadow in the vibrant tapestry of life. And that judgment had come not from strangers, but from those who bore her blood, her fingers curled tightly around the faded edges of a small bundle that held the last remnants of a family that had chosen to discard her like a piece of worn cloth. The word plain had been uttered with such finality, a verdict carved not with malice, but with a kind of resigned cruelty that left no room for protest. Evelyn's mother had looked away, eyes glistening but empty, while Martha, her elder sister, cast a glance sharp as broken glass, muttering under her breath about wasted hopes and the shame of a face, too ordinary for this unforgiving world. The frostbitten ground seemed to mirror the chill within Evelyn's soul, each crunch beneath her boots a muted echo of dreams long frozen in time. She had learned early that worth was weighed in the currency of beauty and charm, and where she lacked those coins, she had only silence and the hollow ache of exclusion. Townsfolk would pass by, their eyes sliding past her as if she were part of the bleak landscape, a barren tree stripped of leaves, unnoticed yet ever present. Whispers trailed behind her, thin strands of gossip spun from the cold threads of judgment, too plain to marry, too quiet to matter, they said, voices laced with bitter certainty. The small cabin behind her, once a place of warmth and shelter, now felt like a cage of memories, each creaking floorboard a reminder of dreams abandoned. The decision had been made. Evelyn was to be sold, not out of cruelty, but out of a desperate desire for survival in a harsh world that prized appearances above all else. The man coming for her was a stranger, a shadow riding into town with pockets heavy enough to carry the weight of another's loss. As the sun dipped low, casting long fingers of pale light across the frost-hardened earth, Evelyn found herself walking toward the stables at the edge of town. It was a place where the clatter of hooves and the warmth of breath from horses filled the air, a stark contrast to the cold judgment she left behind. Old Jed, the stable hand, was a man carved from the same weathered wood as the fences he mended, quiet, kind, and seeing what others overlooked. His eyes held no judgment when they met hers, only a steady kindness that settled like a balm over her bruised spirit in the stillness between them. Evelyn felt the fragile stirrings of something she had long forgotten, hope. Old Jed offered no words, only a nod and a worn blanket draped over a nearby saddle, a silent promise of protection against the biting cold. The firelight flickered in the stable, casting gentle shadows that danced on the rough-hewn walls, and for the first time in weeks, Evelyn allowed herself to breathe without the weight of shame pressing down. From the far corner, Silas Thorn watched the quiet figure with eyes that had seen the hardship of many winters, a rancher whose hands bore the marks of toil and whose gaze pierced beneath the surface. Silas was a man who understood silence as a language of its own. The townsfolk whispered behind cupped hands, wary of the stranger who sought solace among those the world had cast aside. Yet Silas saw in Evelyn a soul that glimmered with a rare light, steady and unwavering. Beneath the frost, she was not beautiful by their narrow standards. But to him, Evelyn was a quiet flame in a sea of shadow, a story worth knowing. He had ridden into town with the wind at his back and the weight of years behind him. But it was this fragile, overlooked woman who stirred something long buried within his chest. The winter winds may have been sharp and unforgiving, but in that moment there was a stillness, a pause where two worlds weathered and worn met in a gentle understanding. Evelyn's footsteps carried her past the eyes that judged and the voices that dismissed. Each step was a small act of rebellion against the destiny laid out for her, destiny of being invisible and forgotten. The snow muffled her passage, wrapping her in a quiet cloak of solitude, but beneath the cold, something warm began to kindle, a fragile thread of resilience woven from whispered kindness and the soft glow of unexpected connection. That night, beneath a sky heavy with stars, Evelyn stood by the stable's weathered fence, her breath a slow dance of mist in the frozen air. The world around her was vast and indifferent, but within her chest, a pulse quickened a silent promise that this was not the end. Somewhere beyond the swirling snow and the biting cold, a story awaited to be written, one where worth was not measured by the surface, but by the strength of a soul that refused to be broken. As the firelight flickered and the wind whispered through the skeletal branches, Evelyn Mae embraced the quiet dignity of survival, her eyes reflecting the cold beauty of a winter night that held the possibility of dawn. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time she did not walk it alone. Somewhere in the shadows, a watchful gaze held steady, waiting to meet hers when the time was right. And so, beneath the pale winter moon, the slow turning of fate began, a story not of grand gestures, but of small graces and quiet courage. The cold had settled deep, but it could not silence the steady beat of a heart learning to hope again. Winter's grip tightened on the town, folding its cold fingers over every rooftop and fence post. Yet, within this frozen landscape, something quietly thawed. Evelyn Mae moved with a cautious grace, her footsteps lighter now, each one a small rebellion against the shadows that had clung to her. She no longer flinched from the whispered judgments, nor did she hide behind the walls of silence that once protected her fragile heart. The days grew shorter, but within the steady pulse of winter, a slow, unfolding warmth began to take root. Silas Thorn remained a constant presence at the edge of her world, a figure carved by hardship yet softened by quiet understanding. He never spoke loudly or forced himself upon her solitude. Instead, he offered small gestures that carried immense weight, an extra blanket left by the stable door, a steady hand steadying her as she mounted a horse, a glance lingering just long enough to convey something unspoken but deeply felt. His attention was not a demand, but an invitation, a slow-burning flame that kindled trust where none had dared to grow before. The town, a chorus of gossip and harsh glances, continued its relentless murmuring. That rancher's got poor taste, some said. Why he wastes time on plain Evelyn Mae is beyond me. But those voices were whined against the walls of Evelyn's newfound resolve. Each act of kindness, each silent moment shared with Silas and old Jed, built a sanctuary where dignity blossomed like a wildflower beneath the snow. One afternoon, as the gray sky threatened snow, Evelyn lingered by the frozen creek that wound through the outskirts of town. The ice cracked faintly underfoot, mirroring the fragile fractures within her own sense of self. She traced patterns in the frost, watching her breath mingle with the cold air, and for a moment allowed herself to see not a girl discarded, but a woman emerging resilient, quietly strong, touched by a grace that no mirror could reflect. Silas appeared without sound, his approach as steady and sure as the winter sun that struggled to break through the clouds. He offered no words, only the warmth of his coat draped around her shoulders, a simple shield against the biting chill. In that gesture lay 1,000 unspoken promises, patience, a shared understanding forged in silence. Evelyn turned to meet his gaze, and beneath the stoic surface, she glimpsed the depth of a soul that recognized her own. The snow came heavy that night, swallowing the town in a thick, white hush. When morning broke, it revealed a world transformed, a pristine blanket that both concealed and revealed. A reminder of endings and new beginnings entwined. Evelyn had ventured further than usual, drawn by the quiet call of the open land. When the storm's sudden fury caught her unprepared, the wind whipped through the trees, tearing at her thin coat, and the world blurred in a swirl of white. Panic clawed at her chest, but beneath it lay something steadier, a calm that refused to be drowned by fear. Silas found her then, cutting through the storm like a beacon of unwavering strength. Without hesitation, he wrapped her in his arms, sheltering her from the cold with a touch that spoke louder than any words. His eyes searched hers, reflecting a quiet urgency that bound them together in that frozen moment. The journey back to the ranch was slow and arduous, each step a test of endurance and trust. The storm raged around them, but inside the shelter of Silas's steady presence, Evelyn felt a fragile warmth bloom. It was not the heat of passion, but the deeper fire of belonging, a connection forged through shared hardship and gentle understanding. By the time they crossed the threshold into the warm glow of the hearthlit cabin, the world outside had softened, the storm's fury spent. Evelyn removed her frozen gloves and met Silas's steady gaze. No grand declarations were needed. Their silence carried a weight far greater, a promise of companionship, a seed planted in the fertile ground of mutual respect and quiet affection. Days passed with the slow unfolding of trust. Evelyn found herself lingering in the spaces Silas inhabited near the fire's glow, beside the horses in the stable, along the snow-dusted fence line. Each moment was a brushstroke on a canvas that revealed a woman not defined by the harsh judgments of her past, but by the strength she nurtured within. The town's whispers began to fade, replaced by tentative glances and softened tones. The same voices that once scorned now carried the faintest hint of admiration, or, at least, acceptance. Evelyn no longer felt the sting of exclusion. Instead, she walked with a quiet confidence, a dignity earned through resilience and the gentle grace of small kindnesses. One evening, as twilight bled into the snowy horizon, Evelyn stood at the edge of the ranch, the cold air crisp against her cheeks. Silas joined her without a word, their shared silence a comfortable presence that needed no explanation. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the rough texture of his coat, a gesture tender and tentative. Silas responded by closing the small distance between them, his hand covering hers with a steady warmth that spoke of a future unwritten but hopeful in that moment. Beneath a vast expanse of stars, gleaming cold yet bright overhead, Evelyn understood what it meant to be truly seen, not for the surface that had once been deemed too plain, but for the soul that had endured, transformed, and blossomed in the quiet stillness of winter. Life's worth, she realized, was not measured in the fleeting glances of strangers, nor the cruel whispers of the past. It lived in the small, unspoken moments of grace, in the steadiness of a hand offered, the warmth of a shared silence, the courage to hope again when the world had whispered to give up. And so, as the wind carried the soft music of night across the snow-covered plains, Evelyn Mae and Silas Thorn stood together, two souls intertwined by resilience and gentle understanding. The cold had not broken them. Instead, it had forged a bond stronger than any storm. To you who listen, remember, the true measure of beauty lies not in the eyes of the many, but in the quiet recognition of the one who sees the soul's light beneath the winter's frost. Sometimes it is in the coldest seasons that the warmest stories are born. If this tale has touched your heart, linger a while longer. Subscribe and join me as we uncover more whispered Wild West tales where the quietest voices often hold the deepest truths.